Operation Enduring Freedom was the name given by the U.S. government to the global war on terrorism. Missions were done all around the world, however, the most important mission done by the U.S. was the one in Afghanistan. This mission also became known as the War in Afghanistan. Operation Enduring Freedom was initiated on October 7, 2001, after the terrorist attack on 9/11. After the attack, NATO invoked the Mutual Defense Clause, which was the first time this clause was ever used. Just 2 weeks after 9/11, the US and Britain were the first ones to launch airstrikes and missile strikes that lasted 5 days in Afghanistan. Shortly after, anti-Taliban groups also joined them in combat. In November of 2001, America and Britain saw their first victory. They had established a forward operating base, which allowed them to send more troops over to Afghan. Just the presence of our armies pressured the terrorist groups, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, from moving around freely within the country. In that same year, on December 7, 2001, Kandahar, the last major Taliban stronghold, surrendered to the U.S. Marines. In response to the Mutual Defense Clause, many nations all around the world, such as Turkey, Australia, Canada, Italy, Netherlands, the French, the Poland, and many other countries, sent thousands of troops to Afghanistan to aid the U.S. In 2002, the UN sends the International Security Assistance Force to provide security for all Afghanistanians. The UK led this force, but later NATO took over control. By 2004, things were really starting to slow down in the Afghanistanian war, partly because by 2003, we had begun Operation Enduring Freedom in Iraq. In 2007, there was a total of 50,000 troops in Afghanistan, all from the US and NATO combined. That same year, one of the top Taliban commanders, Mullah Dudallah, was killed by a U.S. operation. As things were starting to look better for this war, in 2007 we received yet another attack by the Afghanistanians. A suicide bomber blew up one of the NATO air bases, which resulted in several killed. Until this time, the level of truce was considerably small, until the Taliban started making advances and threats to the U.S. Army. After this occurred, Obama decided to increase the number of troops to 100,000, in addition to the 40,000 troops already in place by NATO. That following year, peace was finally starting to come to Afghanistan, and countries began to withdraw their troops, the first one being Netherlands. And in 2011, one of the biggest advances by the U.S. Navy SEAL was accomplished. Osama bin Laden had been killed by a raid and was buried at sea. Nonetheless, that same month in August, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda avenged bin Laden's death. This was the deadliest month for the U.S. forces in all the war, causing hundreds of deaths. NATO and American troops weren't the only people to suffer during this war. There were several innocent people that were abducted during this time too. Daniel Pearl was among one of these. He was a Wall Street reporter who was taken by the National Movement of Restoration of Pakistan. 1 month later, the FBI received a video confirming his death. Sergeant Bo R. Bergdahl was another person. He was taken hostage by the Taliban and was released 5 years later at the end of the war. Another war hero who did not have a happy ending was Wasil Ahmad. He was an 11-year-old boy who was commanding a unit of the anti-Taliban fighters. However, one day a Taliban gunman on a motorcycle shot him down while he was buying food for his family. By 2014, the war in Afghanistan had officially become the longest war in American history, lasting 13 years. By this time, many Americans and even NATO officials had lost faith in being able to restore peace in Afghanistan. That same year, Obama gave a speech promising the end of this war. And in December 18, 2014, the war had officially come to a conclusion. The war came to a conclusion with an official ceremony in Kabul, Afghanistan. Both NATO and the US were to withdraw all troops. So what were the results of this war? It resulted in the first democratic election ever held in Afghanistan, electing their first president, Hamid Karzai. Communities all over the nation were returned to civilians in peace. The U.S. helped train and create a new Afghanistani army, which helped resume the responsibility of the safety of their country. Several Taliban and Al-Qaeda leaders were detained and sent to Camp X-Ray in Guantanamo, Cuba. Some of the negative effects of this war were the deaths. There were about 2,200 Americans killed, and it cost American taxpayers about $686 billion. while many Afghanistans became richer off of the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. So where are we now? The conflict within the Taliban group itself has led to a new terrorist group in Afghanistan, ISIS. But that story is for another time.